We next explore the opportunities and also the challenges associated with digital transformation in South Africa this Freedom Month, given the inequalities and also the digital divide. This comes as we seek ways to drive the economy, improve social conditions, as well as increase our nation's competitiveness and build capacity in a workforce that is part of that wider global digital economy. So Cliff de Wit, Accelerating Digital Group MD of South Africa, joins us for this Freedom Month discussion. Cliff, good morning. Thank you for making time to be with us here.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
So Cliff, happy Easter. Let me start off there. Perhaps also just commemorating Freedom Month. The need for digital transformation, it's rife given this fourth industrial revolution that we find ourselves in. And I wonder if you could just speak to South Africa's digital footprint, the lay of the land in overcoming this digital divide that we are presented with at this juncture.
Yeah, so it's interesting if you kind of look at South Africa. You know, on one hand, we're a very developed economy. We're a very mature economy, certainly in the private sector. And then, of course, we sort of have a rural economy that probably isn't as developed. And I think we see a lot of discussion in the press, a lot of discussion in the media about connectivity. And if you look at sort of digital transformation, it takes two sides to it typically. It's the first side is sort of that side of production. What is creating digital products? How is the private sector embracing that into the products that they sell? How is industry itself changing to be more digital? On the second hand, you kind of see the consumption of these digital assets and these digital products. But do we have a population that is digitally connected to be able to actually participate in the digital economy? We kind of see South Africa sort of transitioning to that. I think the opportunity for us as a country is certainly how do we participate more in the production side? Because I think my big worry is that if we really just remain a consumption economy, we're really just buying stuff from other more developed countries.
Yeah.
And our economic opportunity as this world transitions is to be part of that production economy, especially in this world of AI.
So how do we begin to leverage digital technology at large? Because it's important to create a supporting ecosystem, encourage innovation in South Africa. It comes at a cost. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, look, I think certainly education is a huge part of it. I think if you sort of look at all of these advances in digital, education and building a workforce that is capable to build the digital products, understand digital products, secure digital products, is certainly a big part of it. I think there is this concept of research and development that helps build these new things. And how do we have a country that is innovative? How do we have a supporting infrastructure that's innovative? So the work that's typically done at universities, I spend a fair amount of time at this university, boards that I sit on, and there we talk a lot about how do we support research that practically moves into the commercial sector. I think that's a really important part of it. And then the other important part that we don't often talk about, but I think is very important, is there financial support for growing small businesses that have innovative ideas that can turn those into products and services at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, compliance then also comes to the fore because we obviously see digital surveillance, privacy issues peeking through. And because there's so much data involved in that processing, ownership of that data is something that, people question as well. Tell us a little bit more about what that looks like in terms of, compliance, how it's also factored in that regard.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, really good question. I think, this world is moving so fast at the moment that catching up with compliance, and I use that catching up word very, very literally, is always this moving target. So what tends to happen is that commercial entities push the boundaries very far. We can just look at what's happened in history, what Uber's done, what many of these organizations do. Look at all the noise about Facebook that's in the media, how they push the boundaries. And what happens is the regulators and the compliance typically catches up with that over time. I think one thing that's in our favor now is that we do have a regulator. The regulator is active and starting to regulate the flow of digital information. We actually have a good cyber crimes document and set of rhetoric around how we deal with cyber crimes, how they're reported. I mean, the regulator put out a bulletin last week about breaches and how they should be reported. So I think as a country, we have a reasonably robust framework to deal with regulation. I think what needs to happen is that that needs to be tested, and the regulator needs to have some cases that tests that framework. But I think as a country, we have a really robust set of regulations. Now, I think, again, technology is going to run super fast. People are going to push those boundaries, certainly in terms of privacy and how you can exercise that. But I do feel comfortable that we have a nice set of regulations and a good regulator in place. I think puts us in good stead.
All right, because extended in that conversation is also some of the threats and the risks associated with cybersecurity. And to your point about our cyber strategy and the regulations that are, quite up to date and perhaps, is in effect. Talk to us about what emerges given the trends that are coming through. But even if we're looking at the overall cyber warfare, what should people be aware of? How do we better arm ourselves? I mean, increasing attacks of ransomware, information stealing, those are concerning.
Yeah, they are very concerning. And I think it's just going to get worse. You did right with the position, right? I think as we become more digital, the target or the prize behind our digital assets becomes bigger and bigger. Our banking moves online, our wealth moves online, all of our services move online. Cyber criminals or criminals in general follow the digitalization process. And again, it's an arms race, right? So I think we all need to get better at how we protect our data, how we think about securing our data. In many cases, locking your front door is sort of, it's obvious for you. But locking your digital assets isn't always that sort of obvious as we think about it. And there, I think the education side of how cyber criminals work, how phishing attacks work, how impersonation attacks work, just needs to get more and more driven into our society, into our young ones. Again, I think our kids tend to be more aware of this because they grow up in this. But I think it also then moves into the responsibility. And we talked about the production side of this earlier. The responsibility moves quite quickly into the production side of the digital economy. So are our larger organizations protecting our data with the right set of rigor? Are we using the latest security tools? AI is adding a massive amount of capability, both the threat actors, the people performing the bad stuff, but also the protectors.
Yeah.
They can look at huge amounts of data and say, hey, look, that's really interesting. Is there something wrong? I mean, I was just in the US last week, and all of a sudden, my credit card had a transaction in Argentina. And my bank phoned me in less than 2 minutes and said, this doesn't look right. You're not in Argentina.
Yeah.
That's a really good example of people using digital assets to kind of protect me from cybercrime.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, extended to that point about the use of AI and innovation. I mean, the ethical considerations, legal considerations, and even just the use and deployment across industries and sectors. You've spoken to an example, and we've seen the impact of it to date. Perhaps we could also speak about agency. How do we begin to complete the African story in relation to this? I'm asking this because obviously algorithms exist. There's bias, unfairness in algorithms that must be mitigated against.
Yeah. So the AI algorithms and the kind of the bias and agency is a great word in African context is such a good point. And again, I think it comes back to this point that I was making around the production side of this digital economy. I think, the West is obviously producing very capable models. They're spending billions and billions of dollars training these models, but they don't always have the same information base that we do. And I think as we get better at producing our own models, or using those models and training them with our localized data, it's going to become more relevant in our context. There's another really interesting company they called Lelapa that's doing language localization within the African context. And they're getting amazing results building their own AI models that's doing language localization that is not happening by the big organizations across the world. It's just a small example of how AI is getting localized in the context. But it does rely on us having the capability to do it locally, having that R&D to do it locally again. And I'm keen on that. But I feel very passionate about having our own capability to do that.
Yes. No, absolutely. And obviously it's going to foster growth socio-economically through this digital transformation at large. So let's leave the conversation there for now. Cliff DeWitt, thank you for joining us and happy Easter. Enjoy the rest of your long weekend. Cliff DeWitt is Accelerate Digital Group ADG's MD South Africa, weighing in this Freedom Month. We're exploring digital transformation, bridging the gaps regarding the digital divide and what the future looks like in terms of AI use and innovation.